Good evening. I'm Dr. Michael Morgan. I'm coming to you live from lovely Hinsdale, Illinois, just slightly west of Chicago. So thank you for all you folks who are tuning in, whether you're West Coast, East Coast, whatever coast. So this evening, we're going to talk about intelligent simplification of direct composites. So basically, I'm going to show you over my career, I've gone from doing cases in a very complex multi-shade fashion to sometimes just in one shade. So we'll start out a little on the simple end, of course, and then near the end, I'll show you folks some super complicated cases the way I used to do them. Let's see here. We get my PowerPoint to cooperate. There we go. So that's me. And that's what my daughter says I look like before I have my Red Bull in the morning. And here's where I am. I'm about 18 miles due west of Chicago for you folks who are on other coasts and don't hang out here much. So a long, long time ago, I wrote an article for Dental Economics called Lessons Learned from My Daughter. And one of the premises in there was simplify your juggling and simplify your life. So basically, I do a lot of my procedures in composite, a lot of them. And one of the reasons is I love working with it. So composite is the basis for a lot of cases I do, even the complex ones that end up being, porcelain in the end. So the quest has always been, how do we take the unnatural and make it look natural, whether it's in the posterior or the anterior. And if you like some of the things you see tonight, I need to give credit where credit is due. A lot of these I learned from Dr. Dietschy at the University of Geneva. So if you like what you see, you might drop him a note and thank him. So after I worked with Dieter, I started doing a lot more composite, and I even did some of these full mouth cases in composite where we have direct composites, indirect composites, all kinds of composites. I'm also going to talk about a new product this evening, Clear Fill Majesty Universal, which is a single shade composite. And these are a couple cases I just did in the last couple of weeks. One posterior, which we'll talk about. And then I did this diastema closure in the anterior. So as I said, the goal of this presentation is to show you how I've simplified my life and simplified a lot of things in the practice. So assistants like that because they have less to deal with. Staff members in general like that. The doctor likes that because there's a lot less inventory, less cost. And we're going to talk about the Majesty ES2 system. So ES2 is a wonderful system. You can use the classic shades to do single shade composite restorations. You can use the premiums to do multiple shades, so dentin shade and enamel shade, and then the new universal material, which I'll also talk about. So which component of shade taking is the most important? Is it value? Is it hue? Is it chroma? I would argue that it's value, because if you get the amount of value wrong, those are the people you see walking down the street, they're 3 blocks away, and you can tell they had their left central done at some other office other than one of ours, because the value's way off. The hue may be great, the chroma may be great, but the value's way off. So the ES2 system is set up based on the Vita, the classic Vita that we were all taught even back in dental school. So I've been doing this for 36 years. Long, long time. And we all know Vita's been around forever. So this system was built around Vita, but they simplified Vita. So when I take shades, I take them from, the dentin, the gingival 1/3, and then we kind of fine tune from there. I don't know if any of you doctors use True Shade, but that's one way to help, zero you in on exactly what you're looking at. You can actually take, photographs through here. So with ES2, you have options here. With classic, it's a single shade restoration technique. You're just picking one shade and using that for the whole restoration. That could be an anterior or posterior. With the premium, you're using 2 shades or more, using a dentin shade and an enamel shade, and sometimes a couple of enamel shades, depending on the situation. So with ES2, what they do is they took the whole Vita shade guide and they basically simplified it down to 5 shades, except for D4. So for those of you with a lot of D4s, sorry, it doesn't quite get that low value. But with the right combination of an enamel and a dentin shade, you can cover basically every shade in the Vita shade guide. So you can see here, there's even, Curare has little technique guides and kind of like a little formula guide they can provide you that'll show you, okay, if you use A1 Dentin and A1 enamel, you can cover these 3 shades. If you A2 Dentin, A2 enamel, you cover these 3 shades. It's actually an amazing system. It really simplifies things a lot. So as I said at the end, I'll show you, there's some cases where I used 5, 6, 7 different shade composites to do a restoration. And now most of the time I'm using 2 in the anterior, 1 in the posterior. Occasionally on just the most complicated thing you've ever seen, like in my practice, I might use 3 in the anterior. So basically use an enamel and a dentin if you like the layer. And it's basically biomimetic. It's a simple anatomic replacement technique. So again, like we talked about, you either pick classic, single shade, or premium dual shade. And it's really simple. For shade taking, you're going to look at the value like I talked about first, and then you're going to pick out the tab that's closest to that. And from there, you're either going to do class 1s, like you can do in single shades. This shows also doing anteriors in single shades. And for posteriors, if you like to layer, which I used to like to do a lot and even do characterization and things like that. But these days, I'm much more in the simplification. You can do great restorations with wonderful anatomy with just single shades. So what makes ES2 unique is the way it diffuses light. So when light goes through a tooth, it diffuses differently through enamel than it does through dentin. So if that isn't taken into consideration, that's why you have a lot of composite systems that have, 25 shades, 35 shades, because they need to cover all the different shades that are available in nature. But in this system, you don't need to do that. And it has to do with the filler particles. So the unfilled resin diffuses light like enamel, and the filler clusters diffuse it like dentin. So you have the best of both worlds. And then with ES2 Majesty Universal, now I have something in the posterior that I can use in small and medium-sized restorations that's just a single shade, and it doesn't matter if the tooth is A1 or C3, because the way it diffuses light allows me to blend that in. It has a really nice chameleon effect. So I'm sure all of you have seen, there's a whole plethora of companies that have these chameleon composites now, but some of them actually don't work too well. A lot of them are really translucent. And the only way to make them work is to put a dentin shade under it. And now you've just defeated the whole purpose of having a single shade composite. So we'll talk about, class 1 composites, or I am going to talk about class 1 composites in the posterior. So if you look at this is a case where I use 2 shades. So there's a dentin shade and then an enamel shade. That's not characterization. It's not stain. It's just a dentin showing through the anatomy. So, and like I said, in the days, maybe 20 years ago, I used to, take a little endophile, put all sorts of wonderful colors in here and things like that. One, I found out a lot of times the patients actually didn't like that because they'd come back and ask me to remove it because they thought they'd say, hey, you made it look like I have decay in my tooth. And B, it eats up a lot of time. And C, when I did this on family members at first, when I was trying to learn how to do it, because you always do things on family members first when you're trying to learn how to do it, I noticed that stain would wear off after not long a period of time. So it's a lot of work for, basically it was for my own benefit. And yes, we need to do some things that make us happy, but in the end, we also have to be somewhat efficient and produce it at a certain amount of dentistry in a certain amount of time. So with multiple class 2s, what I learned from Dieter was to turn these all into class 1s, because what's easier to restore, a class 2, or if this was a class 1? Of course, it's a class 1. So turn them into class 1s and then restore them, and I'll show you how to do that. So way, way back in ancient history in 1999, Ron Jackson and I wrote a few articles. So Ron wrote this one, The Importance of Technique in Preventing Post-Op Sensitivity. And basically the gist of the article is all sensitivity is iatrogenic. So if the patient walks in, they're not sensitive, and they walk out and they are, it's our responsibility. So we did something we shouldn't have done, or we didn't do something we should have done. So, when we look at all the etching systems on the market these days, or all the adhesive systems on the market, there's just A to Z. So I like simplification. I like things to be easy as possible. I like things to be efficient. I don't want my assistants running around grabbing all sorts of bottles for different types of things. So it just comes down to, do you like total etch or do you like self etch? So if you like total etch, Universal Bond Quick, you can use as a self etch product, as a total etch product, as a selective etch product. SC Protect is if you like self etch, or if I'm doing a system or a procedure where I'm doing self etch, I'll use that. So here's my protocol. Basically in the anterior, it's either total etch or selective etch. And then in the posterior, for moderate size, 2-step self etch or 1-step self etch. And larger, and sorry for the noise in the background, the village decided in its infinite wisdom this week to do construction right outside my office. So, so larger ones, 2-step self etch or selective etch. And here's a couple of studies for those of you who want to see those. So basically, whether you're etching or not etching, if you're using a really, really good self-etching product like SC Bond, SC Protect, then you're going to get real good adaptation on uncut enamel. If it's cut, then you really should be doing at least selective etch. And with the self-etch adhesives, what about microtensive bond strength, and what about the amount of time that you use it? Do you just, do you just place it? Do you need to scrub it? Do you need to leave it a certain amount of time? So you can see these studies were based on either 5 seconds or 20 seconds, and we're talking about efficiency. So, I still spend, once you've cracked open the adhesive and you've added it on, you might as well take the time to place it properly. So I'm not really worried about getting done in 5 seconds, but obviously we want to keep time to minimum, keep moving forward. So these studies were done in 1 year of storage in water, which is like double the usual time that these studies are done. You can see the bond strengths are, they're pretty impressive. So the latest technology is Universal Quick. And what they did was they added a unique amide monomer instead of HEMA, which is common in all adhesives. So it penetrates quickly. It's more hydrophobic, which is real important. So you're not getting, all sorts of bond leakage and things like that, and has stronger curing properties. So let's talk about something simple. So I did this obviously on a model. It's easier to see. You can always shoot every angle from a model. Can't always do that in somebody's mouth. So class 2 prep, you place a matrix of your choice, and then you're going to wedge. So, if I have an extra space, or I'll show you later if I'm doing multiple teeth, then I pre-wedge everything. You're going to place your separating ring of choice, whether that's Garrison, Trio Clip, whatever it is. And then in this case, I used SC Protect Bond. So you need to put a drop of each in the wells. And then you can scrub it in, or the last one, like I said, in Universal Quicking, just place it for 5 seconds, air thin it. And then if you're using 2-step, obviously you're going to place the bond. If you're using 1-step, you're not, then you're going to light cure it. And then in the bottom layer, especially in the box, it's really important to place flowable composite. And then doctors have asked me, do you place flowable and then just place the hybrid over it? Or do you place a flowable and cure it? You definitely need to cure it. So a flowable composite has more elastomeric properties. So think of it as a little bit like a rubber band. It stretches a little. So down here in the box, where you need that along the gingival margin, you need that little bit of the ability when it's light cured. Just think of it as stretching. It's not actually stretching, but it enables you to get a nice tight adaptation. Because if you put hybrid in here and you pack it down in there, you're going to end up with some air voids somewhere or some air bubbles. So you put a thin coat with an Explorer, you light cure it. And then this is called a centripetal buildup. So centripetal means to replace any proximal wall before proceeding on to the central part of the restoration. So in this case, it's the mesial. I'm taking a little bit of composite. I'm building up this wall right here. So you could use Majesty. You could use a trans color or like an E2. And I use a little bit of sculpting resin as pure resin. So it's not going to contaminate. Don't use bonding agent. Don't put bonding agent on your composite instruments because it will contaminate what you're working on. Let's see here. So there's another little view. And what I do, I like syringes. So again, this is the way I was taught. I was taught to use syringes. So I cut these little resin forms out. I personally don't use compules, even though they're the most popular among doctors by far. Compules are. But I like to cut my own little pieces of resin, the amount I need, the shape I need, and then I'll place them. So here I'm going to place a cusp and then light cure that for 5 seconds. We're going to move around and do that and then come back and cure the whole restoration. So see, I'm placing on the lingual, I'm placing each little cusp area and doing a little bit of anatomy at the same time. And then light curing it, you take out the ring, you take out the wedge, take out the matrix, you clean it up. Scalpels are wonderful. They're the only instrument I know of that will cut composite clean. So if you have a little overhang in the proximal box, you can cut that clean. If you have a little overhang in the anterior, you can cut that clean. If you use a burr, you're going to gouge the tooth, gouge the restoration. And after finishing, you can re-etch the surface and apply bisque cover to seal it if you like to, or you can just leave it polished, whatever your choice is. Of course, if you apply the bisque cover, you need to light cure it. And the final resin color is internal, so it comes from the resin itself. So this is an example for those of you who like or enjoy or want to see a class 2 composite with proper function, which is the most important thing, and then really natural aesthetics. So these are what I used to do all the time, but they take a lot of time. So if you look at this, used to be an amalgam, so to put in the different layers and the different colors and the different stains and like that, that takes a lot of time. So there's where the original restorations were, the old amalgam, the old breaking down sealant. I used an old sectional matrix. You know, this is from a long, long time ago, like 15, 17 years ago. And one thing that I do is I always notch the matrices, because when you leave the tab or you leave the extra matrice above, you lose your reference point, which is the marginal ridge of the adjacent tooth. So I always notch these with like a diamond. And then again, proper adhesive protocol, then flowable composite, light cure that, then centripetal buildup, make the wall, light cure that. And now we have a class 1. What's easier to replace, class 1 or class 2? That's pretty obvious. And then I put a dentin layer in, cured it, put another dentin layer in, cured it. Let's go. There we go. And then, you know, a lovely little stain there, enamel layer, brush, polish. And this is from PPAD in 2004. So those are great. They're a lot of fun. This is an artist I treated. She really wanted her teeth to look, she emphasized how she wanted them to look exactly like her other teeth. And it is fun to do. It takes a lot of time. There's the artist. So we're going to talk about, so back in 2000, Ron Jackson and I wrote this article, The New Posterior Resins and a Simplified Placement Technique. So here we are 21 years later, talking about the same thing, but with a different material. So we're going to talk about monochromatic versus duochromatic. So you could use, in these, you could use a dentin layer and then an enamel layer, but these are relatively small. You know, even that's still relatively small. It's encroaching up on moderate size. So I would much rather use Majesty Universal because it's going to blend in with tooth structure and it's going to let me use just one shade, which makes life so much easier. So in this case, matrix band, wedges, and again, see how I notch these so I don't lose my reference points here. Otherwise, you're going to have with these way over bulked composites that you got to cut the heck out of and you kill all your anatomy. So that's real important to notch that. So I clean these with cavity cleanser, and then I selective etch them, rinse them off, and you can use SE Protect or Albon Universal in 2 coats, air dry, light cure, flowable again. So you're seeing a pattern here, placing flowable, then building up the proximal walls, and then I'm making sure those 2 are done. So both these are done here, then they're light cured. There they are. And then the final layer, I place in 2 increments. Depending on the size, if they're small, I do 1 because of the C factor. First the buckle, light cure for 5 seconds for initial tack and shrinkage. And then the lingual, this is called the T-pens. They make all these little different shaped brushes that are great. You'll see some later in the anterior. So I can do some anatomy with these. So you can use compulas if you like them. You can cut little resin forms like I do if I like them. And that's the final restoration. So I think that's pretty decent for a single shade composite, and one that you can use for not just this shade tooth, but one that's, a different shade, lighter, darker, higher value, lower value. So you check the occlusion, of course. There's the final restoration. And the nice thing about the Flowable is it's radio opaque. So you can see, I like to see afterwards, everything's all sealed up. There's no open margins. And there's our Majesty Flowable. So you take multiple class 2s, convert them to class 1s like I talked about earlier. And that's a nice result. You can use whatever you like. It's like Clear, HO, Toffemeyer, Microband, Garrison, Tri-Clip. So I tend to be down here, these two guys. So here we're going to do multiples, or I'm going to do multiples. And so these are class 2 composites. Remember what I said? Easiest thing to do is make them into class 1s. You could use ESTA Protect or Universal Quick. So in this case, I use something, I did this on purpose. I use something familiar to everybody. So Toffemeyers, we all have Toffemeyers, right? They're not the easiest thing to work with class 2 composites, but it can be done. So part of what I'm doing here is if you're going to use self-etch, one thing you have to think about is this goes everywhere. So if you don't have some kind of matrix on here, the self-etch is going to go over the lip here of the prep. It's going to go down onto the root. And when you light cure, it's going to light cure down there. Because remember, it sticks to everything, not just what you want it to stick to. So part of the reason these are here is to keep the adhesive inside the prep. So in the end, when you have all this metal on there, my son says, this starts looking like a Transformer movie. And you never know what this is going to turn into. So the way I restore these is you either pick the mesial, distal, whatever makes you happy. So in this case, I picked the mesial and I put a band and I put rings on all the mesials, then did a little centripetal buildup. See, these are done. And then I went to the distals, and just to prove a point, I used a different system and I mixed 2. So here I have Garrisons, here I have Tri-Clip, and you can mix and match. They all work great. The key thing is you need to really wedge the heck out of these guys to make sure you get separation. So you don't end up with, there's nothing worse than doing not only 1 composite, but 4 and getting all done and having either light or open contacts. That's like the nightmare of the century. So now that these are all class 1s, doesn't that look simple? It is super simple. And then you can take a single shade composite, which is actually what I use to start with. Like I said, I put compules on here because most of the docs on here like compules more than those of us who like syringes. And you can fill in the nice class 1s, do a little anatomy, and you're all good. So let me go back. Let me go back. There we go. So it makes life really simple. Just make your life simple. So now we'll talk about, these are bigger preps. These are old composites. They're breaking down, a lot of things going on. So because they're bigger, see, I pre-wedge everything here. I want to start the teeth separating before I even start prepping. I need all the space and approximately I can create so that when I'm all done, like I said, the nightmare is when you get all done, you look at everything, it looks awesome, you take the floss and it drops through like there's nothing there. Then what are you going to do? You're in a really, really bad spot. So after the preps or the initial preps, you can see small, moderate, bigger, bigger. Okay, so in small, moderate, I'll use something. You can use either ES2, like one of the classic shades. If you have fun with layering, you can use a dentin enamel shade, or I could use Universal, the single shade. But in the bigger ones, I find if I use Universal, it gets a little bit gray because it's a little translucent. So you almost have to put a dentin shade in there. So in this case, I'm mixing and matching. I'm using, in the smaller ones, I'm using Universal. In the bigger ones, I'm using one of the classic shades. And then we've got some really deep areas once I remove the rest of the decay, pretty close to the pulp. So Theracal from Bisco and all these is appropriate here. So I use cavity cleanser or Conceptus. And then, like I said, so this is a combo platter. So I'm using the Majesty Universal and the two smaller ones, and I'm using one of the ES2 shades in the larger ones. And so for folks, I see that questions are kind of popping up here. So what I'm going to do, if it's okay, is I'm going to kind of wait to the end to answer these, because I've got like probably too many slides to go through. But I will run through those, I promise, at the end. This is a little different than doing live. Live, I find it really easy to answer questions during. Here, actually, in my office, I've got 3 screens going at the same time, so it gets a little OCD, bouncing back and forth. So here, I'm doing some selective etch and total etch, and then you could use, Universal Quick. If you're going to use, SC Protect, you wouldn't be doing total etch, you'd be doing selective etch around the edges. Rings placed on, flowable composite, and then I'm going to build up, I'm going to pick the end one. So I'm going to do the first premolar, and then I'm going to do the second molar. So first premolar, second molar, and then I'm going to move to the middle ones, because what I'm doing is I'm pulling out the wedges, and I'm trying to play with, the amount of wiggle room I have with PDL and moving teeth. So I'm going to build these up, make them into class ones, restore them. You finish them high dry, then you go through whatever you use to finish, what you like to use to finish composites, whether it's Diacomp, whether it's Shiny Kit, and then those are the final restorations. So I mixed 2 different composites, but they look pretty similar in color. They turned out, okay. The anatomy's okay. It's functional. That's the most important thing. So I'm going to look here real quick. Okay, I will read a couple of these here. So can you please go through detail regarding sectional matrix notching? I do that by using a fine round diamond. And, I run that on dry, and my assistant's real close because there's little flakes of metal coming off, and she suctions it off. What's it about Garrison and Triclip steers you away from Paladin? Nothing steers me away. I have a lot of both of the other 2 in my office. I think Paladin's a great system. I think all those I listed are great. So some of you are going to be way better at some of these systems than I am. It's just, we're all creatures of habit, and I've become a creature of habit for those 2. So I think Paladin's a great system. Are you building the entire proximal wall with flowable? No, I'm just laying down a little bit of flowable just on the gingival margin. I'm curing it, and then I'm building up the proximal wall in the composite I'm using, the hybrid that I'm using. What's your opinion of pre-wedging? Good question. I think that probably popped up before because I was a little late bringing it up. So pre-wedging is great because you'll get more separation of teeth, and particularly if you're going to attempt the super complicated of doing 4 teeth at one time, then you have to pre-wedge. There's really no alternative. Okay, so we're going to evaluate color and anatomy in a class 4. We're going to go to anterior now. So when you look at this is a patient, must have brushed his teeth like once every few months. We use a shovel, we cleaned them off, and here's his final restorations when we're done. So the first thing I look at is, surface texture and anatomy, first wet and then dry. And I'll draw a little diagram for myself, and we take tons of photos. So the docs asked me, what's the best piece of equipment I ever invested in my office, ever. And, we have all different things we can buy, whether they're scanners or CT machines and all sorts of things, and we have those here. But the best thing I ever invested in was big 75-inch monitors in every room, because when you put teeth up on there for patients to see, no matter how great they look, they still look bad. And it's really easy. People are, everybody has a little Missouri in them. Please show me. So I put things up on them on there, whether we're doing posteriors or anteriors, and they can see. I almost don't need to explain sometimes what needs to be done. They just look at it and they see, oh God, that doesn't look very good, or that looks terrible. And I'll put this up there for them to see. And then I'm drawing or doing a little Photoshop. So let's talk about prepping, because this is super important. So you want to prep a 45-degree bevel, and I use a medium diamond to do it. So I'm just grabbing this smaller case as an example. And then I'm using a disc to take off any, any collagen, any contaminants, anything off the teeth. A medium's a little much for the whole tooth. I'd use something lighter for the rest of the tooth, but this needs to be pristinely clean if you're going to etch it, which we are later. So we're going to do that. And so there's 3 distinct finish lines in this. There's a 45-degree bevel. That's probably the most important. And as far as camouflaging this, 45-degree bevel is the most important to hide the finish line, that line, so you don't have this dark line there. Then the scallop bevel is the most important in getting it to blend. And then you're going to have what you can call the infinite etch bevel, which is wherever your etch goes to, that's where your adhesive is going to go to. That's where this is going to be. In the end, when you polish this, the green one's pretty much going to be gone. You're going to be down around here when you finish these. But this is really important. And the key point I need to make here is when you're trying to restore this and you take your dent and shade, you don't bring the dent and shade up to right here and cure it. You need to bring it all the way up to here. If you don't, you're going to have this very definitive, very ugly, very not happy, dark line right here. So the dent and shade needs to come up all the way on the bevel, and then you add the enamel after that. And then we're going to talk about putty stents. So when you do a contour guide, because you need some kind of guide to where you're going, you can freehand it. So you can do the finger mode, which is you put your finger behind you and you add composite. Okay, that works in a pinch, but that's a little stressful. I don't find that like terribly accurate, and sometimes you end up cutting away a lot of the really nice work that you did. You can do a composite mock-up in the mouth, which is what we do from time to time. My preferred method is to take an impression and have, if it's a couple teeth, maybe on a really good day, 4 teeth is the most I'll wax up. And then if it's any more than that, then for sure the lab's going to do it. And then we make a putty stent off that. Why? Because we need to know that where we're putting the incisal ledge is a proper place from a functional standpoint first, and then from an aesthetic standpoint, obviously, as well. So why are we making this? Because we're going to use this putty stent to place the lingual enamel. Basically, we're going to replace that. And you can use something like Ultradent Pearl Frost. It's great. It's been great for years. Every composite system has some shade you could call milky white. They may call it something else, but it's milky white. So in the ES2 system, that's called WE, white enamel. But whatever you have in your office, there's some milky white there somewhere, someplace. So I said we're going to add this, we're going to put it on the back of the tooth, we're going to replace the enamel layer, and then we're going to use this as a guide for the rest of the restoration. You're going to light cure this, and then you place, if you're missing proximal wall, obviously you can light cure that, you add it and light cure it, and now you can build everything up. So think about earlier when I talked about you take a class 2 posterior and turn it into class 1. In this case, you're building kind of like a shelf, a guide, and now you can add in here, and it's a lot easier. Trying to do this and envision this without some kind of guide is really, really tough to do. So mock-ups, I said another way to do this is mock it up. So you could put it in the patient's mouth. If you don't have time to do a wax up, you don't want to do wax up, you don't want to send it to the lab, you don't want the patient to wait, the patient doesn't want to wait, then you can just mock it up in their mouth. You can take some old composite that you have lying around, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what color it is, and you do a rough mock-up in the patient's mouth. You get the contours right, get the incisal ledge right, and then you're gonna make a putty stent. So you're gonna take some putty, I like Kettenbach, and you're gonna make a putty stent of the teeth. So if you're gonna do a mock-up in the patient's mouth, then you're doing the putty stent in their mouth, which is a little more challenging. Obviously, if you have to do a wax up, then it's a lot easier to do it. It's lab work. So here we go. And then, so you've got your putty stent. You're going to trim it. The most important thing is you want to trim it right to the incisal edges with a really, really sharp scalpel. This is a little too high, so I went back and trimmed it. This is what it should look like when you're done and when you look down from more of a gingival view. So I'm going to do this on a model just to show you how this could be done. So obviously we're doing it on a model. Regardless of what adhesive I'm using, we're not going to etch it, but we're going to use the adhesive. And then here's your lingual enamel. You're going to replace, and I talked about it could be PF from Ultradent, could be WE, could be classic B1. And there's two ways to do this. So you can replace the whole lingual enamel, or some people I know like to do the mamelons right off the get-go. So this one case I did that. The more common way I do it is like this. So you have your lingual shelf, it's still a guide. And now you can use this to put in some characterization, like if you want a little blue, something a little more transparent, translucent, you want a little white, you have areas to put that in there built into it already. So here I added a layer of A1 Denton, or you can put A1 Classic. But again, the Denton layer must, in capital letters, cover the bevel to mask the transition area. Let me jump over to questions. Okay. So again, if you're going to do it, like I showed, if you're going to make mamelons, then you have space to put like a trans blue or one of the premium enamels, or you go back and use some PF or any of a bunch of different shades, depending on what you want to do here. And I'll show it more in a live patient case in a little bit. So this is called a convenience form. You make a round ball, a composite, place it on the tooth. I bring it down with composite instrument, shape it, and then cure it. So you can see how, we got a little bit, I'm trying to match this as best I can. I'm a bit off, but we have some translucency. It's not like a monochromatic denture tooth. And these are the T-pens. I love these things. They come in all different shapes. You'll see later I use the flatter one a lot in the anterior. So facial contours, we need to get this tooth cut back a little more so it looks like this one. I use a red pencil. You can use graphite pencil. I've seen people use glitter, all sorts of things so they can see the microanatomy and the contours of this tooth compared to its next door neighbor. And then we're going to fine tune the facial and lingual contours. And then discs are great. So for getting the incisal edge correct, and then for doing line angles, so we get these two to match. And the great thing about your matrix that you made is if you save the parts you cut from the front, you can actually use it to check your buccal contour if you want to make sure that you're right in line. And then we're going to go through the polishing sequence. So this is a little older for me, using Jiffy brushes and polish. Now I actually use a two-step method. I also used to use Ina Shiny Kit, which is awesome. But it's got like about 6 or 7 steps in it. It's got 3 polishing pastes, A, B, and C. Diacomps are great. So they have, for a composite, they have a green one and a gray one. So use the green one first and the gray one second. And that's pretty much all I use now. Once I've used like, I'll use a fine diamond, and then I'll use an enhanced disc or cup. And then after that, I use 2 diacomps and I'm done. So again, I'm trying to make things more efficient, but still have the same result. So here's your final contours. This tooth looks relatively natural. Again, I'm trying to mimic this, which actually doesn't look that natural. So here I took 3 different shades of composite, WE, which is white enamel, just the A1 Classic, and then the A1 enamel, and made 3 tooth forms from them. And you can see the difference in translucency, the difference in opacity from those. So when I do cases, what I'll do is before we start the case, I'll make small composite balls and put them on the tooth and then light cure them, because as you all know, composite changes shade when it's light cured, some way more than others. So I'll put the different shades in there that I think are appropriate. It might be like A1 and A2, and then A1 enamel and A2 enamel, and then light cure them and then look at how they compare to the area that I want to restore. So this is actually, live patient case. We're not on a Dentec anymore. So this patient's primary concern, and this is an old case of mine from a long, long time ago, as you could tell from the photography. So we didn't like that number 9 had asymmetry. Didn't like the color. So I did a little gingivectomy, not enough in retrospect. And we'll take little cardboard cutouts of either blue or like neutral gray so we can check this and then check the next tooth for color. And in this kind of dentistry, you have to measure accurately. So This is my gauge from dental school. This is my gauge probably 10 years out, and this is my gauge now out to 2 decimal points. So it's really important that centrals need to be symmetrical. Can't just guess. So here we're doing a mock-up. Remember I said most of the time I'd like to do a wax-up, but it's not always practical or possible. So I'm using some Majesty Flow. I'm doing a quick mock-up in the patient's mouth. I'm shaping it out, getting it ready. And then I made a stent in his mouth, place some cord. I know I'm spinning a little bit here, but I'm trying to make sure that I keep within confines of time. And then I took off the old composite. So this is what was left when I did that. And then Teflon tape. You can go to Home Depot and get a year's worth of Teflon tape for like a couple dollars, which is great. And we use it in all sorts of things now, not just composites, but implants, and just, it's amazing what you can use it for. Anyway, so we're going to etch. We want to protect the proximal surfaces, and we're going to rinse this off thoroughly and apply our adhesive, light cure it. Used to love these Ultra Looms. They don't make them this big anymore. And here we go. So common theme, putting some milky white resin on the lingual, placing it behind the tooth we're going to restore, light curing it. And this is what it should really look like. It should be ultra thin. So in this case, I'm putting some white resin for an incisal halo. This piece is way too big. It looks more like a sausage. It should be like a third of this width here. So I place that, form that, light cure it. Now again, like I have a nice shell. I put dentin shades in, or one single dentin shade. Do a little mamelon forming. And if you want to, this is called ragging. That's where you take, a small instrument explorer, the one I just showed before, and you pull this down, because natural teeth don't have like 3 evenly shaped mamelons. They're all irregular. Nature's always irregular. And then I placed white enamel, or you could do the same one, classic, over the facial up to the full contour, like that. That's an Almor instrument. It's both ends of it. T-pens, again, common. So this is a convenience form, but better explained. So I take a round ball of composite, then I drag it down over the tooth, but I do not try to form the proximal or the gingival. See, this is open. This is a lot easier to do. So you get this all exactly how you want it. Use the T-pens, flatten it all out, light cure it. And then I'll make a little sausage piece of composite and place it here. And that way I can do the distal, the gingival, and the mesial all in one piece, excuse me. And then take a brush, smooth it out. Like I said, modeling resin, light cure it. And then common theme again, bulk reduction with discs. And then there's my super happy red pencil. And some final polishing. Again, now these would be diacomps. There'd be a green diacomp here and a gray one there, diacomps. But I do like the Ina Shiny kit. It's just a lot more steps. And then final polish. And in this case, I did it with, you could do it with enamelized and a goat wheel or felt wheel with the Ina Shiny. So this is Kevin. So the nice thing about photography is it lets us evaluate our work. So when I look at this, I'm a little short. This tooth's a little shorter, and I didn't take enough gingiva away. So, and like most patients, when I went back and asked him if I could, adjust this and bring this up here and everything, he's super happy with this. So in the end, I've learned after all these years, if the patient's happy, then we're all done. Okay, so how practical is multiple shades versus single or dual? So in this case, it's just going to be too little. I use a little bit of dentin in each of these spots and then covered it with a little bit of enamel. And then there's the patient after. So really simple, really quick, no tooth reduction. It's all additive. All you're doing is cleaning this off with some discs and etching it. Again, 2 shades, a dentin and an enamel. After, of course, the insides, I've cleaned out all the stain and things like that. So we talk about, extreme makeovers and, how popular that show was and doing 10 veneer, 20 veneers with somebody, but you can have a small restoration. It could be life-changing. So for this young lady, she broke her tooth the night before prom. So think about how just stressful that would be. So she came in and I told her, we do a quick restoration. And didn't have time to wax it up or do anything like that. And I did a dentin and enamel shade, and she went to prom and she was so, so happy. When I saw her next time, I asked her if I could replace it and bump it up a little bit, and she just loved it the way it was. So restorations do not need to be complicated, long, involved, or expensive to be life-changing. When you talk to your patients and listen to what they, it's really important to them, you'd be amazed at some of the things we think are simple are just a huge deal to them. So here's peg laterals. A lot of my anterior composite work comes from orthodontics, from one orthodontist in particular in the area. So we work a lot on cases together and get teeth in the right position, and then I do my thing. If I inherit cases from another orthodontist, like I inherited this one, these have been they've been closed down too much, but composite can do some great things. So think about it. I actually have a piece that we send out to local orthodontists, so we can help them, make look better in their patient's eyes. So, this case is nice, but think about it. If we're able to restore these and make these look like real laterals, it makes the orthodontist look like a hero, and they love that. First of all, the patient's parents love it. The patient loves it. So then the orthodontist loves it. So everybody's happy. So with these teeth, did a little gingivectomy. I roughed these out with like Photoshop. So this is just a little dentin. So a little dentin in the areas where you're going to have some show through, little enamel over the outside, 2 shades, real simple, straightforward, but it's a nice restoration for patients. And in younger patients, I would never do like a porcelain veneer on here. I just think it's too much. Another post-ortho touch-up, patient comes in, had some issues during ortho. I think bracket removal was a little aggressive. So I clean this up, we get it all ready. Those are the preps. I'm going to etch these, and used All-Bond U actually. And then you could either use a dentin and enamel shade or just a classic. So in this case, I did use a dentin and enamel shade, so 2 at the most. And here's the immediate post-op, so they're still a little dehydrated. They don't match exactly, but pretty good in the ballpark. So this is more the type of work I do with the main orthodontist that I work with, because we work on cases together to get teeth in the right spot. So I do space planning, and I ask them, move this tooth this way and make space here and do this, that, so that I have proper space to work with. Because otherwise, look at the size, the width of this central compared to this one. I mean, what are you going to do if you get this case and they say just restore it? What are you going to do? It's better if you at least have the time to work with them to move the teeth in the proper position. So here's the patient before, here's the patient after, 2 shades again. She had a little whitening done, 4 multi-surface composites, and a little incised ledge for the canines. And it looks nice. She needs some grafting for sure, but that case turned out nice. She was super happy. And you can see you get a little translucency with the material naturally. So here's a post-ortho correction. Let's see how we're doing on time here. All right, I'm going to have to speed this up. Post-ortho correction, all sorts of hygiene issues. Preps again, interproximal. You have your lovely Teflon tape, etching, bonding, dentin shade to fill in. The area is going to show through. Enamel shade, you restore 1 tooth at a time, or at least I do. I'll do 1 central, finish it, do the next central, finish it, 1 lateral, bang, bang, back and forth, back and forth. So finish, and then discs, goat hair wheel with some polishing paste, and Ina Shiny ABC, and case looks pretty nice. Here's a slip and fall, crack, and so again, you see this case, there's repetition, Teflon tape, selective etch, adhesive, stent, building up the lingual wall, mylar strip, building up the proximal wall, adding a little bit of, adding dentin first, then some enamel, T-pens, finishing, lingual anatomy, got to get that together. Come on. And there's like immediate post-op, a little dehydrated. You know what? I'm going to show this case. I'm going to jump to the end and show some complicated ones to show how much my life has changed. So this is Natalia. She cracks tooth off. I'm putting a bevel on here. We're making a stent. There's a lingual shelf. There it is, cured. I'm starting to build up dentin. I'm adding more dentin, then I'm putting enamel. These are great. These little greenstones are great for microanatomy in the facial. I'm polishing it. And there's Natalia afterwards. So we used to call these postcards. We do this for every case. I would do the before and the after, and I would take a picture. So obviously I take the clinical pictures, but I would also take portraits of each of the patients. Okay, let's do this. Let's see if this will let me scroll through. Where are we at? Oh, technically I'm time's up. All right, let's see. All right, I'm going to do, this won't let me do this. So excuse the clicking, but I'm going to click through these till I get to, well, here's a good example. 24 years ago, I did this case, and all I had in colors then was ugly. So 24 years later, and it's my brother, 24 years later, he comes back and says, hey, can you do these, make them look a little nicer? So yeah, I think I can do that. So here's his teeth before. I had to do little, some little gingival recontouring. He wanted one shade. I said, please, come on, dude. They're like so white. And he thought they were great. I said, please let me make these look more natural. So I did a cutback on them. And all I did was place a little enamel over the top of them. And look at how much different they look. To me, this looks relatively real. To me, this does not. But everybody has their idea what looks real. So, but it's my brother. I can like lean on him a little bit. So I put a little blue and white effects in there. And there's my bro. So I'm going to skip through these. And this was a case I just did in DPR. Just got published last month. So it's just restoring a lateral, this lateral. So I'm going to skip through. Sorry, because technically I'm about to get booted. And polishing. So there's it before, there's after. All I did was just go through all the steps I just did. Just it's focused on one tooth. And actually I did all four for her teeth. So there's a single shade, just an enamel shade on these two. And then there's a lingual enamel, a dentin, and a facial enamel on those two. And it looks relatively real. Okay, so let me show you one case. All right, let me go all the way to Taylor's case. Okay, so this is what I used to do for cases. So Dr. Vanini set up this wonderful diagram. If you use this composite system, it's very complex and has a really long learning curve. Ask me how I know. So you figure out the shade, the value, how much intensive it has, how much opalescence, where the characterization is. So there's minimal prep, but there's a 45-degree bevel, especially on the lingual of this. So I'm drawing a diagram of where I'm going to put the lingual enamel. So I put the lingual enamel. Then I cover the bevel like I talked about with the dentin shade. Then I bring down some dentin. So these are all separate shades. So if you want to go ahead and count. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4 white on the insides of the ledge. 5 is blue in between the mamelons. 6 is a little white characterization horizontal. 7 is the enamel or the final enamel layer. And then 8 is the clear layer over the top. So 8 is crazy and it's way too much time. It was fun, but I'm much happier doing 2 now. So this looks really nice, but 8 shades takes a long time. Long time. But she was happy, so I was happy. Okay, so let's see how we're doing. How did you create the contact with the putty matrix in place? How did you create the contact? So the putty matrix, when you put that in on the lingual, you put that into place, you push the material up against the tooth as much as you can, and then you light cure it. Oh, there's my hint. Got it. That I need to be done. So I'm going to go to last slide. Okay, so thank you for listening because I ran OT here. So now I appreciate all of you taking time out of your evenings, and my kids do as well. So they say thank you for listening to Dad. So if you have questions, I'm here and I'm looking at them. So I'll read some of these out and I'll answer them the best I can. Let's see. Thank you for some nice compliments from some of you folks. That's very humbling. I really appreciate that. How did I bond old composite to new for my brother? It's my brother. I cut all the old stuff off. I didn't bond old to new. If I was going to bond, if I had to for like a renewal or repair, I would micro etch it and then go through the whole bonding procedure. But in his case, I cut it all off because that stuff's just, it was old and ugly. Do sealants need bond applied underneath or just etch and sealant? I mean, in the best world, I do sealants as like small resins. So I etch them, I put adhesive, and then I actually use flowable composite. And I think that's it. So thanks again for everyone for attending. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Have a great evening.